What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy, and today we are going to be talking about drums again, specifically the Dist-Tube culture, which has a few videos on it, but not a whole lot. But the reason why I wanted to cover it is, well, from a lot of talks with some of my peers about it, for one, in relation to Decapitator, which I've never used. Also, I've never used the Culture Vulture, which is what this is modeled after. However, I have used Dist-Tube, and I can say that it's a really good way to get some extra punch to your drums. So I've got a couple of examples. I've got one that's more of a kit of the kind of drums that I make. So I made these from scratch. And then we've also got an acoustic kit from Superior Drummer 3 to where I've got, oh, nothing, really just I've turned the drums up so that way they're a little bit louder with like a limiter or like punch exciter or something, so they'll sound like this. So with these, I wanted to give you a couple of different examples in case if you're somebody that's like, yo, I want to use this for breaks, or yo, I want to use this for kind of halftime wonky, sloppy drums like this. And if you're interested in drums in the first place, then for one, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But two, I've got a bunch of master classes on all different ways to process drums. I just put up a couple of videos on how to pretty much turn anything into a kick and snare. For example, this kick actually started out as this thing, which sounds like this. So if that doesn't convince you, then I don't know what else you would need in order to get cool drums. So anyways, let's go ahead and look at the Dist-Tube culture. Right now I'm not using that on anything, but what I want to do is pull this on the master bus, or I guess the drum bus, if you will. And I want to go over some of the features that it has. Now I will say that just as a usability standpoint, this has triode and then 3 different pentode modes. Did I say that right? And then it's got bias. It's got kind of like a presence user or something of the sort, output and mix. Then quickly going over the advanced features, you've got a low pass and high pass, or high cut and low cut rather. You've got compression with either a gate or expansion, or not expansion, but really kind of like pulls the sustain of the drums out, assuming that you use this on drums. Then we've got some EQ options. We also have a tilt, which is kind of nice. And then we've also got a post EQ on here as well. So there's not really that many functions. I didn't really want to like talk about each one specifically because honestly, you can pretty much figure out, if you're not new to sound design anyways, like kind of how this works. But what I find interesting about it is that it's actually a lot more varied than just picking presets and options. Like you really have to be mindful about how hot you send a signal into it, and then also how to shape it depending on what you get from it. And that's the beautiful thing behind tubes distortions as a whole, as at least as far as the research that I've done, is that it's not just like the same, you know, slap it on and then it's done. This is like, no, you really have to like define and really fine tune each of these functions that this offers. So I'm going to turn this on and slowly introduce the mix. We're going to start with the drum groove, or the drum groove that I made first, and then we'll take a look at the acoustic drums. Man, just right off the bat, dude, just like getting this to slap just a little bit harder and be more aggressive is really nice. Now, I will say that like I have a tendency to like quote unquote overdo my drums, but I don't really care because I like my drums to be as big and as full as punchy as possible. So with this, this isn't really like a, you know, one size fits all. You really kind of have to listen to it. But let's go ahead and switch between these functions, and you'll also notice how it's going to change how you need to manipulate the drive and the bias. Now, one thing with the bias that is just something to be mindful of is sometimes you're going to get some major DC offset depending on how hard you slam this. So if we take a listen to this and turn the mix all the way up. If you're looking over at the oscilloscope on the side for this in particular, the triode doesn't seem too bad, but let's see if we can make this a little bit worse by forcing everything to like only be pushing or pulling for the speaker. Yeah, so here you go. So this is just something to be mindful of, and this is why you probably don't want to like send this in hella hot, or you might want to do like a group channel, even if you want to set this at 100% to where you've got the, you know, fully distorted signal, and then you can kind of mix this in, kind of like parallel compression, but this would be like a parallel tube distortion type deal. But with that being said, if you kind of keep it at a 50-50 mix and you kind of mess with these in between, then you're going to find that there's a lot of variety in here. Now over here on the left, we've got that presence and air. So I believe the presence focuses on the mid highs, and then the air focuses on everything above 10K. So I can't really tell the difference. Even on my Evo speakers, it's also late, so I do have them kind of low. But let's take a listen to see if we can tell the difference between the two. I can tell the difference now. So that's pretty nice. And, you know, of course, depending on how hard you want to slam this, you know, it's up to you. But I always like to see how far I can get away with just slamming my drums to just be like beaten to a bloody pulp. Now with this EQ and stuff, you can dictate like what part of the signal or the frequency spectrum that you're actually putting into the input, which will also drastically change the sound. Just know that if this is at 100% mix, then you might end up like low cutting your drums, so that's where you might want to back off the mix. But this could be useful if you're running this in parallel and maybe you just want to focus on your like fundamentals. So let's say I don't want to mess with the overheads up top, I just kind of want to focus on anywhere from that 30 to 200 hertz. I could do that, and that sounds pretty cool. And that's why I say it's really important for you to try to mess with all of these settings and really figure out, for one, how loud you send stuff in here, but two, what kind of frequencies in the mix and all that. Because as you can tell, if I were to just turn everything hot and turn the bias up, turn the drive up, turn the output up, it's just going to sound kind of like way overdone, right? But by fine tuning this and having a little bit of, I guess, like reservation and slowly introducing a little bit at a time, a little and little, you can actually get some really good sounding stuff. Now this over here is the left and right input, so this is also cool because you can focus on only distorting either the stereo, the mids, or the sides. So if you like to do mid-side processing, this is just one extra step to be like, yo, I guess what we can do is I'll use a mid-side split like this, and then let's say I wanted to turn this up, and we'll just turn this down. And then what I could do is like throw some convolution on here or something. Now obviously that's way too much, so we're going to back off of this quite a bit and kind of pull off of this. But what I'm also going to do is make this significantly shorter, so that way it's not a huge signal. So now that we have this, we can actually go back to the Dist-Tube culture and we can focus on only processing the sides now. So let's turn the mix up, and then we should only hear the sides, that convolution being driven. So, I mean, that's one way to do it. I think that, like, one thing to be careful with on this is that, you know, obviously there's like mono compatibility and blah, 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 and this and that, which if you're listening on, you know, anything except for a PA system, then it's not really going to matter. But just having that extra sense of control is kind of cool, especially when you're trying to shape like really high fidelity characteristics. So I'm going to go back to the left and right mode on this and talk about a few more things. For one, we've got a tilt on here, which is pretty nice. So if you're trying to, provide an overall, I guess, like shelf of this, like let's say you're boosting this really hard and it's really hot. By hot, I mean like you're pushing it really hard and the mix is up and you're driving it super hard. Sometimes if you get too many high frequencies, you can use a tilt to kind of roll everything off in a particular direction. So this can go both ways. This is actually something that I didn't even know about until Pro Q3 came out, but even still, it's nice to have. So sometimes if this is just being a little bit too harsh on either end, or a little bit too boomy or a little bit too metty, then you can just kind of use an overall tilt to kind of shape how you want them to look, which is also neat because typically in most masters with bass music in particular, you will notice that there is kind of like the slope. Not every tune, of course. Some, it's like really hard drum and bass tunes and stuff just have like crazy amounts of highs and stuff, and it still sounds great, and I don't know how they get away with it. But for whatever reason, if this is coming to be just a little bit too harsh, then you have a lot of means of controlling things in that way. So now that we've taken a look at the regular drums, or like my kind of drums anyways, let's go ahead and look at some pretty vanilla Superior drummer stuff. And I'm just going to start from this position because this is kind of where it's a little bit busier. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to throw a saturate on here, or a clipper, and then I'm just going to pull the drive all the way down. So that way, whatever it is that we're doing here is not going to like be super crazy. If you notice, it was said that it was like plus 7.5, but to me it was super quiet. So I don't know. The Superior drummer just has odd behavior as a whole. So with that, now let's go ahead and mess around with some of the settings to see if we can get some nice crunch and stuff from the Dist-Tube culture. This smacks. This one seems to be pretty wild with these drums, because no matter which way you turn the bias, obviously, because the drive is hitting so hard, you're going to have to back off of this a bit. But kind of like this, it's a little bit nicer. So one thing that I really wish that this had, and I know that it's not really meant for this, but just because this is such a wild distortion, is obviously some kind of soft clipping on the end. I still have to use some kind of soft clipper at the end of this, and that's just something that like general distortion plugins, like I don't know, I almost feel like any creative plugin as a whole, I would love for there to just be built-in soft clippers on absolutely everything. So one thing that you might want to consider with this is that this is also going to change depending on what you send into this. So if you send this into a limiter, it might not sound the same. If you send this into, a different kind of clipper, depending on whether you're hard or soft clipping, like not all the algorithms are the same. But just so you know, playing with the bias and, you know, all of the functions that are available on here, you're going to get drastically different results. And that's why, to me, it's really fun and inspiring to use this, because again, it's not just like that same signature characteristic. It's like, no, let me see how I can kind of make these drums pop out. And even though there's only like 5 knobs, there's a lot of sculpting that's available, and I think this sounds awesome, especially for $50. So I'm not sponsored by these guys. I know that the sale is going on. I actually did reach out to them, and they got back to me after I had already purchased it. So we might have some kind of maybe they'll let me review something else in the future or whatever. But honestly, after demoing this, you know, product, I'm like, you know what, this makes my drums slap, and I felt like I was already making super slappy drums, so it's a pretty easy for me to recommend. And I mean, it depends. If you really like to make hard-hitting drums and stuff, then obviously this is a no-brainer, especially for, again, $50. But if you're somewhat on the relatively conservative side and whatever, I think that you could probably just get away with doing your typical compression and like light saturation, and, you know, keep your drums relatively mellow. It really depends, you know, because not everybody makes bass music, and not everybody wants to create, you know, the biggest, fattest, punchy, you know, in your face drums. And I will say that the louder your drums are, the harder it is to like add anything else, because this is so busy. It's a problem that I struggle with in my productions. But I mean, I don't know, I was like, oh, this is awesome, you know, just listening to it. So let me know your thoughts. Do you guys like the Dist-Tube culture? This is just a couple of examples. What do you guys think in comparison to Decapitator, or in comparison to the actual Culture Vulture emulation? I think by UA Audio or somebody, I don't remember who made it. And then also, if anybody has a Culture Vulture, what does that sound like? There's this other dude on YouTube. If you just look up Dist-Tube Culture Review, he actually has one versus the other. And I was like, oh, that's pretty sick. And it's a really nice comparison. And according to him, he was saying that it's not quite the same, but it still has enough of the original characteristic to where Arturia did a really good job at staying faithful. So anyways, I hope that you all enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching my videos. Please subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to that 20K. Alckemy.com for neuro-based presets and drums, or book a lesson with me if you're wanting to enhance your production. And thanks again. I'll see you all in the next one.